For more than 40 years, the Kurdistan Workers Party, the PKK, has waged an armed insurgency against Turkey, fighting against state repression and for Kurdish rights and autonomy. But then, in late February, something unexpected happened.
To some breaking news now, and Kurdish media is reporting that the Kurdistan Workers Party says it will heed a call by its jailed leader to declare a ceasefire with the Turkish government.
Abdullah Öcalan, the PKK's imprisoned founder, called for the group to lay down its arms and dissolve itself. Days later, the PKK, which is labelled as a terrorist organisation in Europe and the US, declared a unilateral ceasefire with Turkey. In this episode, we ask what's led to this moment, and could this be the beginning of a lasting peace between Turkey and the Kurds? I'm Gemma Ware, and this is The Conversation Weekly, the world explained by experts.
I call for arms to be laid down, and I take responsibility for this historic call. All groups must lay down arms, and the PKK must be dissolved.
Abdullah Öcalan published these words from his prison cell on an island south of Turkey. Öcalan's letter, which was read out by MPs from a pro-Kurdish party, was aimed at ending 4 decades of armed struggle in Turkey, in which tens of thousands of people have been killed. Despite being imprisoned in solitary confinement since 1999, Öcalan has remained a central figure in the Kurdish movement, both in Turkey and across the region. His call for the PKK to abandon its armed struggle came months after the leader of a Turkish ultra-nationalist political party launched an initiative to bring an end to the conflict. This wasn't the first attempt for such negotiations between the PKK and Turkey. Over the past few decades, there have been several rounds of peace talks, but they've all collapsed. And meanwhile, Turkey has extended its war against different groups of Kurds into neighbouring Syria and Iraq. To understand the significance of this moment and what it means for Kurds in Turkey and across the region, we're joined by Pinar Dinc, Associate Professor of Political Science at the Centre for Advanced Middle Eastern Studies at Lund University in Sweden. Hi Pinar, welcome to The Conversation Weekly. It's great to have you on.
Hi Gemma, thanks for the invitation.
So as part of your work, you look at various political and military movements amongst the Kurds in the Middle East, including Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. So I want us to get some understanding of what we're talking about here when we're talking about the Kurdistan Workers Party, the PKK. Why was it formed?
Yeah, it was founded in 1978 by Abdullah Öcalan, and initially their goals were mainly a separate Kurdish state. It was a Marxist-Leninist, but also a separationist movement at the time. The Kurds were involved in Turkey's leftist movements, but then even Turkey's left had a different understanding. The Kurds were often viewed as part of their internationalist struggle, but it wasn't really accepted as a separate identity. Their issues, their discrimination and assimilation wasn't really put on the agenda by various Turkish leftist movements. And there was an awareness building up that the Kurds were going through something different as an ethnic group in Turkey.
The Turkish army carried out their bloodless coup just before dawn on Friday, September the 12th. They detained the Prime Minister, the major party leaders, and the heads of labor unions.
One of the key events was the 1980 coup d'etat in Turkey. And what followed afterwards, the Kurds were really very severely discriminated. They were tortured in the Diyarbakir prison. And the treatment they received was, I think, a main factor that has led to their support from the Kurdish people.
And it was founded by Abdullah Öcalan. Tell us about him and what he represents for this movement.
He is a very strong leader. He has a huge, strong personality cult. He was involved in Turkey's leftist movements. I mean, there were also already groups forming that were focusing more on the Kurdish identity at the time. And then eventually, in late 1970s, he established his own group. And then he established the PKK in 1978. Then the coup d'etat came. But we know that he actually moved to Syria before the coup d'etat. So the PKK leadership was able to go there and continue with their organization and movement from Syria in that period.
How did Turkey initially respond to the PKK in the 1980s? And how has Turkey's approach shifted over the past 40 years during that insurgency?
Up until early 1990s, it was warfare, mainly like military response to this. From the early Republican period onwards, and even late Ottoman period onwards, there have been series of Kurdish insurgencies. And therefore, when the PKK started its insurgency, it was just only natural for the Turkish state, this unitary nation state, to respond to that with military force. They have applied different military strategies in 1980s and then in 1990s. But I think from the early 1990s onwards, there had been a series of ceasefires between Turkey and the PKK. Some were very short-lived, some were relatively longer. But I can say that the early 1990s, 1993, 1994, they were really quite dramatic for the Kurdish people. Intensified military campaigns, especially in the 1990s, we have seen intensified warfare, village evacuations, environmental destruction, burning of forests and husbandry, forced displacement, forced disappearances. I mean, it was a really violent period that had a huge impact on the resilience of the movement and the persistence of their struggle.
Relevant institutions are working in accordance with the short and medium-term roadmap of our EU accession negotiations.
Turkey became an official candidate for the EU in 1999. After this process, I think there were a series of attempts towards the integration to the European Union or EU accession process that started in this period. And there was a Kurdish opening at the time. This was an attempted peace process. There were discussions about Kurdish cultural rights, local autonomy initiatives. And then the peace talks ended with conflict that continued from mid-2011 until 2012, followed by another round of peace talks between the Turkish National Intelligence Organization called MIT, and Hakan Fidan was the key actor who is now the foreign minister, and Öcalan. These talks started at the end of 2012. And then we have the more recent peace process from 2013 till 2015.
A major step on the difficult road to peace. The PKK leadership came down into the foothills of the Kandil Mountains to announce that fighters would soon withdraw from Turkey.
At the time, there were talks about the gradual withdrawal of the PKK forces from the Turkish state, democratic reforms from the government side, and the integration of the PKK into political and civilian life following disarmament. It was actually the period when I did my PhD as well. And really, visiting Turkey's Kurdistan was a different kind of feeling at the time. You felt like everything is working out. It's going to be okay. You know, there were a lot of democratization talks, a lot of talks around bringing the Kurds and the Turks together. There were like these wise people committees. There were a lot of talks around democratization of Turkey. And then it collapsed in a really devastating way in the summer of 2015, which continued until 2016 March with urban warfare, killing, again, thousands of civilians, displacing thousands more, and horrible, complete devastation of Kurdish cities, destruction of cultural sites, a destruction of complete areas. And then we had the 2016 alleged coup d'etat.
The world watched in shock as a military coup unfolded in Turkey, a NATO country and ally of the West.
And this was also followed by even further rapid authoritarianism. There was a widespread crackdown, purging tens of thousands of government employees, shutting down media outlets, and arresting academics who called for peace. After those 2 years, between 2013 and 15, it was a complete crackdown on any sort of even request for democratization, for freedom of speech, for peace. And the interesting thing is that we're now still this kind of crackdown. Yes, we are talking about a new peace process, perhaps, but when we look at what's happening in the daily life in Turkey, we still witness increased oppression. I mean, it hasn't really changed.
The Kurds and their struggle are not just confined to Turkey. What role has Abdullah Öcalan played in the Kurdish movement beyond Turkey, across the region?
He had been an influential figure in the past 5 decades. What he did which has implications for Syria as well, was a maneuvering through the geopolitical conflicts involving Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. So what he did was using tensions between these nation states, which all deal with their own Kurdish question, for his own movement and for his own benefits, right? For the benefits of the PKK. So what he did was forming strategic alliances between different regional actors. Like he had a good relationship with Assad government, for example, for many years until he was forced to leave Syria. So he managed to bolster the PKK's influence in the region. So in Kurdish, what they call Kurdistan in Syria is Rojava. Turkey's Kurdistan is called Bakur. Iraqi Kurdistan is called Bashur. And Iranian Kurdistan is called Rojalat. What happened in northern East Syria, let's say, was that they managed to use the Syrian civil war as an opportunity to establish autonomous cantons and then creating an autonomous region. And this was, of course, directly linked to Abdullah Öcalan's ideas around democratic confederalism, direct democracy, bottom-up democracy, that also has the pillars of gender equality and social ecology, or like ecological sustainability. So Öcalan is the ideological leader. Like whatever is being implemented in Rojava, that is actually in line with what Öcalan has been claiming as the peaceful solution to the Kurdish question in the Middle East.
So Abdullah Öcalan was arrested in 1999 in Kenya. He's been in jail ever since, in a prison on this island south of Istanbul. But then a couple of weeks ago, in late February, he wrote a letter calling for the PKK to lay down its arms and dissolve itself. And then 2 days later, the PKK leadership declared a ceasefire in its armed struggle against Turkey. What conditions have led to this moment and Öcalan's decision?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very tough one as well. I can maybe say that it is because of mutual needs. Both Turkey and the PKK need peace. Both groups recognize the necessity of addressing regional tensions. I think that ever since the 7th of October, things have really rapidly changed in the Middle East. When we're talking about the Kurdish question in the Middle East, we're automatically talking about at least 4 nation states: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. In Syria, there is the Syrian Kurdish reality, despite Turkey's years of efforts trying to get rid of the Rojava revolution or the autonomous administration that has been established by Kurdish-led forces. They remained, right? They continued to get support from the international community, and they were resilient. They resisted. So they're there. They have a strong military and diplomatic presence on the ground. Having said that, I think the Kurdish movement has also reached some sort of a limit when it comes to the modern warfare technology. Turkey has a huge army. It's one of the biggest armies of NATO. Now we see like increased use of drones, surveillance, and advanced weaponry. And I think the PKK guerrillas in the Kandil Mountains, what they refer to as media defense zones, I think they're also realizing that this is getting more and more difficult. Abdullah Öcalan has reportedly said that in the Middle East, we could have 50 different Gaza situations. What he means there is that if there is conflict, if there's ongoing war, if we see divisions and more civil wars, the actors will be quite comfortable committing crimes against humanity, being extremely violent, extremely destructive without the fear of repercussions. I think what we have seen in Gaza since then has really shown how international humanitarian laws can be violated, and there will be a disregard for UN resolutions. There will be lack of accountability for the perpetrators.
Are there other international dimensions to this too, in terms of the PKK and Turkey's decision?
Turkey's attempts to expand operations in Syria have been hindered by international forces because there is support to the Syrian Kurds. The Kurds have gained some sort of credibility, some sort of position. The EU has been supporting the Kurds and their democratization attempts and their call for cultural rights and democracy. And we don't know what's going to happen with Iran. We know that Trump is trying to reapproach, but we don't know how that will end up. And Iran is basically still, it has been weakened significantly in the last year or so. We also need to understand what they're planning in terms of how to deal with Iran and how to unite forces maybe against that threat or question. It's mutually beneficial for Turkey and the Kurds to put an end to this war that is causing lives, causing economical losses, and causing instability in the region when the stakes are so high and they need to find ways to work together.
This decision by Öcalan to write this letter and to make this call for the dissolution of the PKK and its armed struggle, it's not just come out of the blue. There's been quite a lot of work going on behind the scenes. What have domestic political considerations, what role have they had to play in this?
I can say, at least personally, I was quite surprised when this happened. I think the public, we became aware of this with Devlet Bahçeli, the leader of the Nationalist Movement Party, which is a partner of the AKP. When Devlet Bahçeli made a statement saying Öcalan should call the PKK to disband, and if he's going to do that, he can as well come to the Turkish parliament to do that. That was quite mind-blowing, knowing the Nationalist Movement Party, which is a far-right nationalist party in a way, and its leaders saying Abdullah Öcalan can come to the Turkish parliament to say this. But I think this also shows that there have been communications behind the scenes that we weren't aware of. And I think this is not also surprising because it was the case with the peace talks. We didn't know until it was made somewhat public.
What's Turkey's initial response been then to the PKK's decision for a ceasefire?
Turkey's response was, positive, but they weren't fully satisfied with the ceasefire because they demand the PKK to disband completely, immediately. And we have seen, for example, Recep Tayyip Erdogan even tweeting saying it doesn't matter what they are called, all of them, we mean all of them. But Öcalan's letter has been only towards the PKK, not to Rojava, not to the different political actors or armed groups in Rojava. So I think there are talks around what will happen and what this new process between Turkey and the PKK will mean for different parts of Kurdistan, in Syria, for example.
Well, Syria's interim government has signed a breakthrough deal with the Kurdish-led authority that would bring most of Syria under the control of the new leadership, including...
So just a few days ago, in early March, there was another big development in Syria. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, signed a deal to integrate into the Syrian state under its interim leader, Ahmed al-Shara. Is this related in any way, do you think, to the PKK ceasefire and Öcalan's call to disarm the PKK?
Yeah, I do believe so. Although, again, I was really surprised to see that. And particularly because I think it came in a very difficult time when we were hearing about the Alawite massacres in coastal Syria by the offshoots of HDS and different armed groups. It was interesting to follow what was happening. And we knew that al-Shara and Abdi were in dialogue, but we really couldn't see it coming this quickly. And I do believe personally that it has to do with the new process. So this agreement emphasizes Syria's territorial integrity and rejects fragmentation, but this was already something that the SDF had agreed on. They said that they are happy to be a part of Syria, they're happy to put its flag, and so on. So there was no question mark around that. What is particularly interesting here is that we see that this agreement accepts the SDF forces to remain as like within the Syrian army, but as a separate armed wing, let's say.
What do these broader developments then have for the kind of that ultimate aspiration for some Kurds of different Kurdish nation states? Could this redirect those ambitions in a different direction, perhaps?
I believe if there is a rather peaceful solution to the Kurdish question in Turkey with increased cultural and political rights, the PKK had already been saying that they have no intentions of establishing another nation state. Abdullah Öcalan had repeatedly said that establishing a nation state is not a solution to this problem. That's why Rojava cantons or the autonomous administration of northern East Syria never said that they wanted independence. This was never the case. And the PKK had let go of its independence claims many years ago, more than 2 decades ago. And we already have a federal government in Iraq. We have the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, and that's already done, and that's with a different political party. We can see increased cultural and political rights for the Kurds in Turkey and in Syria. I think what will be remaining interesting to follow will be in Iran, because we have the Kurds in Iran and we know that they have what is called Rojilat, as I said, and we have witnessed the Jinjiyan Azadi, women life freedom protest movement there. We know that numerous Kurdish activists are being executed and criminalized, and this is ongoing in Iran. There's a lot of pressure on the Kurds as well. And yet there's also PJAK, called Kurdistan Free Life Party, and their struggle, and they're close to the PKK. So I am thinking that if the Kurdish question is somewhat solved in a peaceful way in Syria and Turkey, what will remain to struggle for will be in Iran.
You just mentioned there the rights in Turkey, because the words Kurds, Kurdistan, Kurdish, they've officially been banned by the Turkish government. I think the official designation is Mountain Kurds. And Kurdish languages, they've officially been prohibited in public and private life. Is one of the ultimate goals then for a ceasefire to get rid of those restrictions, and to have more respect for Kurdish cultural life in Turkey?
So this is going to be interesting to follow it. It's very important, which is why I think we really need to focus on positive peace here. Now, what we're currently talking about is a negative peace. The Turkish state has not yet said things about democratization and giving Kurds their cultural rights and making peace and so on. We're not talking about transformative justice yet. We're not talking about peace yet. And this is, of course, worrying. This is very worrying for the Kurdish people and for other people who are pro-democracy, pro-freedom of speech, pro-human rights, different leftist groups and different groups in Turkey that are fighting, that are struggling constantly for a better Turkey, for a more democratic Turkey, have every right to be concerned.
Just finally, what challenges really are there in implementing the ceasefire? Because we began this conversation by you telling us that this is not the first time we've been in this kind of situation. There have been periods of hope for peace before. What can we learn from those about this moment, and what needs to be overcome to make this a lasting peace?
I think we need to start with some concrete steps as well. As we're speaking, we still hear that Turkey-backed forces in Syria are targeting areas in northern East Syria. There are still elected Kurdish politicians who are being removed from their office. There are Kurdish politicians in prisons. There are Kurdish regions continuously suffering from environmental destruction. I think there is a need to remember that the PKK is an outcome of these structural problems arising from the long-standing oppression and marginalization of Kurds in Turkey. And addressing these root causes is essential for achieving lasting peace. Without doing this, I really don't think that there will be any sort of positive peace. But having said that, I also think that the prospects for a broader reconciliation process between Turkey and its Kurdish population will be quite valuable, because Kurdish question is there, obviously, but it's so interlinked with all of Turkey's other unresolved issues about its past, about its present, about different communities. There is the huge Kurdish question, obviously, but there's also the questions around the Armenian genocide, LGBTI plus rights, feminism, freedom of speech, media freedoms. We're talking about massive environmental destructions, really severe neoliberalization and poverty. So in Turkey, there are so many problems that need to be tackled. And I do believe that addressing the Kurdish issue is paramount. Solving this problem could actually pave the way for broader societal harmony and discussion of a second century for the Republic of Turkey to think towards a better future.
Okay, let's leave it there on that more hopeful note and what could be. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this week's episode. It was written and produced by Mend Marawani, with sound design by Eloise Stevens. Our theme music is by Nita Saal. Stephen Kahn is our global executive editor, and I'm Gemma Ware, the host and executive producer. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us directly at podcast@theconversation.com. You can sign up for The Conversation's free daily newsletter, and we'll put a link to that in our show notes. The Conversation is a non-profit news outlet dedicated to sharing the work of academic experts with a wider audience. If you like what we do, please support us at donate.theconversation.com, and please rate and review the podcast wherever you follow us. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Thanks very much for listening.